So, Renato, looks like Joe Biden has had classified documents at his house for a long time. How bad is it?
Uh, it's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a tweet.
Hoo boy! Here we are.
No kidding. No kidding. What a week.
Yeah, I was in Mexico when all of this news was breaking, and I was like, I can't deal with this right now. So since I've been back, I've been catching up, and I mean, where do we start? So basically it's a drip, drip, drip situation. First, I think it was 10 classified documents that were found at the Penn Biden Center for Global Engagement and Diplomacy. I think that's sort of I think that's at the University of Delaware.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I thought it was UPenn.
oh,
No?
UPenn. Yes, I think. Is it?
In any event,
In any event, um,
probably you shouldn't have a bunch of classified documents there, whichever school it is.
usually it was a place that was not a skiff. And um, but I'll say, I don't want to mitigate it, but I will say that it was sort of a think tank research center, as compared to, we later find out that there were actually classified documents at his home. And I think even one found in an adjacent garage.
Yes. Highly problematic, even though, as the president noted, it was locked. Obviously, highly problematic. I have to say, the fact that you heard this, as you call it, drip, 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 is a real failure of the response. So to it, and I know some of our listeners may not like to hear this, but I will. As somebody who responds to stuff like this all the time, clients hire me when the DOJ is investigating them or they have a thorny problem. I don't really have any reason I can provide for why you would be waiting for many weeks to search these other locations. I mean, they find out about this in November. They should have just searched everything right away, figured out exactly what facts they were dealing with here. Like, okay, how big of a problem do we have? And then sort of had one consistent message from the very beginning, as opposed to, as you put it, a trip, trip, trip.
I mean, I think they should have done something in August, like after the search warrant was executed at Mar-a-Lago. Sort of be very proactive and be like, we're so concerned about the possibility, that this has happened. We want to ensure that there's nothing here. And I mean, they could have done that too.
Well, that would have been amazing. Okay, that's a level of together, having your crap together that no one who's ever hired me is ever in that category. But at least I feel like by the time you engage me, I should at least be on top of things and proactive. And what I don't understand is, okay, we found a bunch of classified documents at your think tank office. If you have any kind of competent lawyer or team, like the first reaction is like, we need to figure out the extent of this problem. Is there anywhere else you could have possibly had classified documents? Well, I don't think I have any other ones. Well, like, let's just be 100% sure. We're going to hire Jane Doe and John Doe who have clearance, and they're going to go around to all these locations and go through everything and make sure. And I mean, that's the other thing, right? They had like lawyers who didn't have clearance, and so they had to have, that was the reason for like the last two announcements where they had lawyers without clearance who had to stop in the middle of the search. Then they had to bring lawyers with clearance. It was just a little messy.
Yeah. And you have to wonder, I mean, it raises just the bigger issue of what is happening with these classified documents, like during an administration and at the end, that is resulting in this situation. Because having been in the intelligence community, at least in the agencies, these are treated very strictly. If you go in a skiff, You look at stuff in a skiff. You don't leave with things in the skiff. Um, you simply don't take documents home. And I understand that obviously the president of the United States is in a completely different category, but I also have to wonder, like, was Biden just like, I don't know, bringing stuff home in his briefcase to like review at home and leaves it along with his like mortgage bills? I mean, I don't understand really, like, why, like, what kind of accountability or tracking there is that is leading to this type of situation. So that's a separate issue, but it's a policy issue that I think this has raised that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and Henry also agrees, as you could hear. But in all seriousness, no, I think that to me is the one of the big policy things that comes out of this, and really, Congress is going to be, the House will be launching a whole bunch of investigations, partisan investigations to try to make this seem like the Trump situation was very different, but. I think if Congress is really doing its job, I think that would be the question that they're asking and trying to get an answer to, whether or not there are needed reforms to how we handle classified documents in presidential administrations, because I have heard from some people who worked in White Houses that the whole White House is a skiff, and so there is very loose treatment of classified information. And so I think at this point apparent. So given these two episodes, so I do think there's some reform to be done there. I will say, on a just purely legal side, I think there are some open questions as well. I don't think that this matter is going to result in any criminal charges for President Biden. I don't think there's any prospect of that. But I think one open question is, why did my former colleague, John Lausch, recommend that there be a special counsel appointed, given that there doesn't appear that there's any federal crime that would be chargeable here? And based on some of the reporting, it really seems like it may be that there was some dragging of their feet by the president's team regarding searching some of those locations.
I'll offer a suggestion there. So, what I understand is that Lausch was appointed or, charged with looking into this under um, kind of a very, very like a pre-investigation, like
Right.
look into this and just, there's no actual like investigatory powers necessarily, but sort of like oversee and determine like what needs to happen, whether a special counsel needs to be appointed. I will say that the possession of documents, classified documents, in Biden's possession and at his home, which is unauthorized, would, for any other person under the Attorney General guidelines, warrant the opening of what's called a preliminary inquiry. Now, a
Hmm.
preliminary inquiry is actually an investigation, a criminal investigation, but it is intended to determine whether there are enough facts that suggest that a violation of federal law may have occurred. And
Hmm.
so I think that, you know, partly the dragging of the feet, as you noted, but I think as the documents surface, and maybe, um, I don't remember if the documents showed up at his house before or after the special counsel was appointed, but I think it would have warranted that appointment. And I think Lausch was on his way out. And in any case, like, if a criminal investigation has to be opened, I don't know that there was really any other option than to appoint a special counsel, because it would not be appropriate. The perception would not be appropriate for Garland's Justice Department to be investigating Biden, because there would be I mean, it's how we saw Bill Barr under Trump, right? I mean, this is his own boss, basically, creates the perception of a conflict of interest. And so the special counsel would be there. I'll also add that, given that we know that there is an investigation, at least a preliminary investigation, and the FBI is involved, I read that the Biden team invited the FBI to be present when they searched his home, not to have them do the search, but to be present when they did the search, and that the Department of Justice declined because they believe that it could complicate later steps should they decide to issue a subpoena or obtain a search warrant. And I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe you can explain that. But my point is, I don't know that it's off the table completely that Biden is off the hook criminally. And we can explore. I think it would be for very different things than what Trump is being investigated for. But I don't know that he's completely in the clear.
So yeah, let's talk about that. It's interesting that you mentioned that. That was a reporting by the Wall Street Journal, and I've actually been texting back and forth with the reporter Sadie Gurman, or at least one of the reporters who reported that, because I told her I did not. I think she got my. I surmise. I mean, she's not has not revealed her sources to me, but I surmise that an FBI agent is her source who doesn't really understand the reasoning behind that, because it just the way she reported it didn't make any
Yeah,
sense.
it
So
didn't make sense to me either.
okay, yeah. So it was like the reporting was that the FBI wanted like to hold over the Biden camp the possibility of a future search warrant, and so that's why they were withholding having the FBI involved in these searches. The problem with that is the entire having a search warrant would just be having the FBI go in and search. So I've never in my career had a defendant, or not a defendant, I say, like a subject of an investigation, give us consent to search and say, no, we're going to do it the hard way and try to like write an 80-page affidavit to accomplish the same and like get approval to do the exact same thing you're giving us permission to do.
Well, I think that maybe they were slightly different though. I mean, there is a difference between saying, "Hey, you can have the FBI come and watch so they can confirm that we did a thorough search," and then consenting for the FBI to literally come in, gloves on, boxes in hand to go through your stuff, right? The latter is a consensual search. It's saying, "FBI, come in my home, search everything, for what you're looking for and take it." The other is, we're going to do the search, you watch. And I could see in maybe that situation, the FBI being like, no, we don't want to like watch and then have you later say, look, you were there. Uh, you don't have probable cause. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you were there and you witnessed all this stuff, and then complicate it. So maybe is that a possibility? Because I do think those are just
That's
different.
possible, and that's why I think that her source probably didn't have the full context of what was going on. In other words, if that was the dispute, then it's really to me a negotiation. I mean, then if I'm
Yeah.
John, I go to them and say, okay, well, what you really want is you want an FBI agent in the corner to bless your search. So this is what I want. I want the FBI to be part of the search. I want them to be directing your attorneys, and essentially supervising your attorney's search. And if you're not going to let them do that, then we're not going to be involved because you are not giving, but then it's different, right? It's not because we want to get leverage over you in the future. It's
Right.
because you were not willing to permit the sort of extensive search that the FBI thought was warranted. So I think that there's something missing in the reporting, and it's not the reporter's fault. I think it's probably an agent who doesn't understand the legal negotiations because they weren't part of that conversation. They're only hearing secondhand from the prosecutor the reasoning. But I do think you're talking. You brought this up because we're talking about Biden's liability, and I think to me there's only a couple different ways that can go. I mean, the most obvious one is the exact same statute that Hillary was under investigation for, which is why I'd written a column kind of comparing the two
Mm-hmm.
situations. And there's broader reasons as well why I made that comparison. But there it's essentially the standard is gross negligence in the handling of classified material, and it's only been prosecuted a couple times. And as James Comey found, like the standard is so high under the case law that it's basically close to intentional. So it's essentially a sort of standard that it's very difficult to see being met here if the facts are as reported. The other is that he willfully took some of those documents, let's say the ones in his garage, because he really wanted them very bad to work on a memoir or a speech or something. Maybe there you'd have a willful retention matter, but it's I just think it's undercut by the self-reporting and immediate surrendering of the classified material. I just don't see that being a prosecutable case. And I guess, I mentioned the comparison to Hillary. If you want a hot take, this is just been my belief for years. I don't really think the Hillary case should have ever been open as a criminal investigation. I don't think. On my prior podcast, I interviewed Peter Strzok, and I just don't see the reasoning for why they thought there was ever going to be a prosecutable case there. I think here it's a little different. Like it is a little bit more plausible. But it's not much in my view.
Yeah, and I don't even think willful retention is on the table, because the willful retention, at least in the espionage statute, um, is a failure to comply with the demand to return the information. In other words, the statute says that you have it, somebody comes and says, give it back, and then you don't. And so in this case, even if he had it, and even if he had it intentionally, at this point, the fact that they're like, give it back, and he's working on it, I think kind of takes the willfulness piece off the table.
Yeah. When I wrote my column the day after this happened, I focused entirely on the Hillary piece. And I had some comments from lawyers who were like, no, there's maybe willful retention or 1924. And I was just like, well, I maybe, but that doesn't seem consistent with the facts as they're reported. But I just feel so, I guess, but in any event, I mean, the reason I drew the parallel to Hillary is I just feel like these are both cases where this is to me not a criminal investigation you initiate because you really think you're going to bring charges. And so the question is, why are we doing this? And it may be to ensure, maybe there's a national security component to it. Maybe it's just to ensure the public that we're taking this seriously and we're making sure we've retrieved everything. But it's a sort of case that in another context, like if you told me, oh, we've got, this bank robbery case, but actually, the guy thought about doing a bank robbery and he didn't really go through with it or something, where I'm like, well, technically, maybe I could see, you could argue that there was a conspiracy and then they didn't properly withdraw before they gave up on the idea. It's not the sort of case you'd ordinarily investigate. And I just think this is the sort of case, like, would you really bring this?
I disagree. That might not be a case you prosecute, but the FBI is duty bound to open a case if there is any predicate that there's a violation of federal law or a threat to national security. And this would imply both, right? So they need to do an investigation, or at least a preliminary investigation, both, not only to see whether there's a violation of the law, but to say, they need that open investigation to take steps like interview people who have, who are at the place, like all of that. The FBI just can't go and just start talking to people. Like, there has to be a case open. It has to be documented. They have to go through all these steps very methodically. And so I think I think that it's really important to separate the investigative phase from the prosecutorial phase, right? Because you may go through an investigation and then what you're saying is there's just not enough there to like move this any further. In which case you close the case and it doesn't get prosecuted. But I disagree that, like, I think for anybody, there's one classified document in your house, there'd be an open investigation to look into the circumstances.
For everyone listening to this, I think this really reveals the difference between how an FBI agent looks at this case versus a former prosecutor. I think it's really actually an interesting difference. So, the FBI often brought cases to us. And they'd say, okay, we got this guy with, 50 grams of cocaine. I mean, they wouldn't even bother with that, but they'd say, okay, we got a guy with 50 grams of cocaine. We'd be like, okay, well, our guidelines are 500 grams. So, or, a kilo or whatever it was. So, take it elsewhere. We have no interest in your investigation. We're not going to work it. And so there was a lot of times where from a prosecutorial perspective, we're like using our discretion and saying, we're not going to handle your $100,000 fraud case. We're not going to handle your 50-gram cocaine case. We're not going to handle this case that you could argue the guy threatened somebody. It appears to be like a true, not a true threat or not, protected speech or whatever it may be. And we were just saying, this doesn't make the cut. This doesn't make the cut. This doesn't make the cut. And so my reaction to this is like, okay, this isn't going to be prosecutable. So on the front end, if there wasn't this national security element to it and there wasn't this need to like really nail this down, I'd be like, okay, this is never going to generate charges, or the chances of that are very slim. There's better things for us to spend our time doing. There's a lot of crime out there, so let's focus on the stuff that's actually going to generate charges. It may be, though, I will just say, first of all, the national security context is different. You have way, way more experience in that than I do. So that's the first thing. But secondly, putting all that, because I think there needs to be a national security review no matter what to assess the damage. But separate from that, I do think it may very well be that, as you point out, whenever there's a violation of federal law, internally within the FBI, an investigation's open. And all that happens is, okay, we've investigated these 50 grams and we sent it to the state or whatever it may be. And I'm not even seeing that on my end. And from my perspective, from a DOJ perspective, we didn't open it. So because I don't want to have to close it, so I'm not opening that stuff. I'm just on the phone telling you, nope, no thanks. So it's just that's the difference, I think, in our
Yeah,
perspectives.
I think there are many more cases that are open, and that's what the preliminary inquiry is for too. Like it may get to a stage where you're just not finding enough to open a full-blown full investigation. A full investigation is necessary, by the way, to take many of the more intrusive steps, like executing a search warrant. You can't do that unless you have been able to open a case based on articulable facts. Like you actually have facts that a violation of federal law has occurred. And the confluence of the national security and criminal piece is really important here, because importantly, cases like these involving classified information, violations of the Espionage Act, other related things like FARA, these are criminal violations that are investigated on the national security side of the
Mm-hmm.
Bureau. They're not
Right.
investigated by the criminal division. So the people who investigate bank robberies or Medicare fraud are not the ones that are handling these types of cases, because there are different interests involved, and because, you know, there's you have to look at, they're going to look at the content of these documents and say, like, is there any, do we have any sign that this information has leaked, or are we picking up anything from our other monitoring of foreign adversaries or other countries that suggest that they may have come in possession of this information, things like that, that may not rise to
Mhm.
the level of that may not be a crime, but is really important for us to know from a national security point of view.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And that was what I was getting at when I said national security review. I know there has to be an assessment and regarding the potential, maybe other people went into the garage and reviewed this material or whatever. I think that's all very important. I mean, I think just to go back to the Hillary analogy, I think that was part of the question for a while. It's like, is this a review or an investigation? There was like a whole back and forth. I was in government at the time, so I never spoke about that. But from my when I said was critical before, earlier in this conversation about the opening of that, it wasn't a review. I think a review was warranted there, and I think they needed to take a look at it. But once they kind of had an understanding of the facts, what I'm being critical of is James Comey pushing forward with what appeared to be a criminal. I think it was he characterized it as a criminal investigation of what at that point, and so that's to me the prosecutor, getting the call about the 50 grams of cocaine and say, yeah, no, we want to press forward anyway, even though that's not the sort of thing that would ever be within your guidelines to charge. And that's what I'm critical of. So here, I do think, particularly given all of the circumstances, this is the sort of thing you would look into. Sure. But to me, that was why I felt the Hillary case was a strong analogy here, because to me, this is something like the DOJ is going to take a look at. But unless there's something wild that we haven't heard about that, pops in this case, like it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and your political piece was, I thought, excellent on that point in saying, let's compare apples to apples here. But maybe this is a good place for us to pause, because I think that that comparison will largely be lost on the American public. Or I guess an accurate comparison will be lost on the American public, which really offers a ripe opportunity for exploitation in terms of political opinion.
Indeed. Let's pick that up after the break.
Okie dokie. So, so now we've talked a little bit about the legal aspects, and um, even if there is a very, very low likelihood of criminal liability, This looks really bad, Renato. I mean, I think from your average Joe's point of
Sure.
view, I'm just gonna play. I'm not even gonna play MAGA Republican. I'm just gonna talk like be like average, not a Joe Biden stan.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
we've just spent 5 months railing on the possession of classified documents by Trump, who left office, 2 years ago. And here's a guy who wasn't even president, was vice president, and has had this stuff for 6 years, also at his house, also in his garage, and and yet, and then this is the MAGA claim, and yet, he's being treated with kid gloves, and there's no difference. So I mean, and by the way, House Republicans are ready to conduct investigations into Biden's handling of classified documents. They're not going to be conducting an investigation into Trump's handling of classified documents, which will be happening in the dark by the special counsel. So this is all that the public is going to be hearing about and seeing, unless and until Trump is actually charged with something.
Well, they'll be also seeing the investigation into the investigators in the Trump case,
Oh,
right? The
right.
House is going to be investigating the quote weaponization
Mm-hmm.
of the FBI in that regard. Yeah, I mean, look, yeah, I mean, the politics is a problem for the president. I think that you don't need us to tell you that. I think everybody understands that. And that was part of the reason why I like the Hillary analogy, because that's another case in which, I mean, Hillary Clinton paid an extraordinary price, and our nation really paid a price, because I think that had a very significant impact in the 2016 election. And that was literally a case that, I don't think any prosecutor, federal prosecutor, was fair-minded would have brought. I think James Comey was correct about that, even though I think he generally did a poor job handling that entire situation. But I think here, one of the downsides of the transparency, such as it is here, I was critical of the way in which this was handled by Biden's team. I still am, but this is certainly far different than the Trump situation, and they were transparent, and they did come forward, and they did make announcements to the public. And the downside of transparency is it is possible for the media to report more and for there to be more attention paid. So, yeah, I do think it is a very significant issue, and it is. There's been a lot of talk about whether or not it influences Jack Smith. I will just tell you, no one actually knows that one way or the other. None of us, it's not like me and Asha, have wine and fries with Jack Smith every Friday. And no one's ever been in this situation before. But generally, prosecutors just sort of, focus on their own cases and the facts and the evidence in front of them, instead of worrying about what somebody's doing 2 states over, or, 2 offices over, or whatever. But I think politically, I think the damage is there, and I'm, it's sort of beyond my purview or my expertise to know what that impact that has for the president, but it has to be significant.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just imagining the outcry if Trump is charged in the classified documents case and Biden isn't. Because ultimately, to the extent that there's an investigation, these different sections that you've been citing, the Hillary Clinton section, they are all a part of the same act. It's all still the
Right.
Espionage Act. We're talking about, Section D versus Section F, which lawyers are going to get really excited about, but your average person, I mean, it's very easy to say, oh, they were both investigated for the Espionage Act, but yet, one was charged and one wasn't. And I think to me, it's just such a, of all the different, I think investigations, I mean, you have this Hunter Biden cluster, which, nobody understands. I actually I tried to write an explainer on the Hunter Biden laptop. I don't, that's going to be a circus. The, investigating the investigators will also, be also very politically charged. But, this one, I think on its face, there's a legitimate basis to investigate. And I think that then it's easy to spin also.
Yeah. I mean, I really think it depends on how the special counsel, especially Robert Hur, handles the matter. I mean, if he's like James Comey, we're all in trouble, because this is, he's James Comey, in my view, took, he was considering how cable news was going to perceive things, when he was making decisions and how to handle this. I mean, you never had the FBI director, without the DOJ's involvement, much less authorization, like on the sly going and making
That was
announcements
so
and make
weird.
it was very bizarre, and problematic. So if special counsel Hur is similar, like he likes seeing himself on the front page of the newspaper, then we're all in trouble, because I just think that hurts, law enforcement, and the politicization of the DOJ and FBI, in the long run. But I think, assuming that he handles this in an appropriate manner and just comes out at the end and says whatever, I think it's the best way to handle an unfortunate situation. But I do think, look, I think you're right. I will say, by the way, about the House investigation, into the politicization of the, or now what do they call it? Weaponization of the FBI. I think that's designed to go nowhere. I mean, I think they're purposely inquiring into open criminal investigations so that DOJ says we can't give you
Yeah.
anything, and so then they can have litigation that goes on past the election that says that if you just keep us in office, we'll keep going at them,
Yeah.
to get it. But I think,
Or that gives them a basis to impeach.
they're going to impeach Garland or
Oh,
something.
we're gonna impeach Merrick Garland because he's not. I mean,
Them and
you
a lot
know,
of progressive, Twitter commentators could join forces.
right.
Similarly, there's probably going to be a segment of the Republican Party that's going to be upset if Trump, is not successfully prosecuted. Right? I mean, the his competitors for the GOP nomination, and people
Oh
who,
yeah,
right.
I'm sure Ron DeSantis is like wants his butt thrown in jail, so I'll clear the way.
Yeah, you would think, right? So I do think it's a really unusual situation where we have the president and the immediate past president, and really, I think arguably the front runners for both parties' nominations, both under criminal investigation at the same time. And it's mind boggling. It really is.
It's dumb, and I hope that if that's the case, the Democrats will pick another candidate.
I'm going to stay out of that, because you know what, I don't know, and I don't know what's going to happen here, and what turns up. I will just say this: I really hope, for Biden's sake, that he has a team around him that is got this together, their crap together regarding this a little bit more, so that this way there's nothing more that comes of this. I mean, I think this is survivable, depending on what the special counsel says. Sure, I mean, but I'm no political expert, but it sure seems like it. But, if they're more self-inflicted wounds, I don't know.
Yeah, and just I want to just tack on to that on that front, I'm not optimistic because it seems that political instincts are always wrong. I think many of the steps that Hillary took in her investigation backfired on her.
Hmm.
I think, in terms of being
President interview, wasn't it?
well,
Wasn't that one
well,
of them?
yeah.
Like,
I mean, just like very being very resistant, or I mean, I won't say combative. I'm basing this on Peter Strzok's book, an account
mm,
of it. He was there at the front end, but just you know making it harder, which only made it look worse for her. And I think that's what it reminded me of when I saw, sort of the dragging of the feet by the Biden administration, the not being forthcoming, things like that,
right.
that they're not really understanding or being they're not playing good chess here, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, from a purely legal perspective, what I try to explain to clients is that there's a scale. Being guilty or not guilty of a lot of these crimes is not white and black. There's various shades of gray, particularly when you're dealing with intent-based crimes, like intent to defraud, or in this case, whether it's the willful intent to retain or whatever the issue, gross negligence. And so, if you're close to the white end of the spectrum, you want to be highly cooperative. because you're what you actually want to do there is we're trying to get the Justice Department not to pursue the matter, and I just so that's why, just purely from my perspective, all this seems off. And so, like you said, it's the political sort of hijacking and overtaking the legal.
Yeah.
All right, we got to hear more about you after the break. All right, Asha, you were the one on the vacation this time. Where'd you go?
I went to Cozumel, Mexico.
Ooh, wow. I think have you been there before?
I have been there before. I went there a year ago with my boyfriend, and then over the summer to celebrate my dad's 80th birthday. So it's kind of a little favorite spot for um, my boyfriend and me. And so we decided to take another trip. And, before the semester starts for me, it's like a little bit better time because I can't go during the semester and then the summer gets very hot. So, um, we got on the plane. We were on the first flight out of Hartford, Bradley, at 5:40 a.m. and boarded on time. I was very hopeful. I was like, this is going to be great. We're changing in Miami. And then we were informed by the pilot that some system run by the FAA was down. And so they weren't able to get their flight safety report, which they needed to fly, and that he had no information on when it would be back up.
Well, I've never heard about this. Is different than the Southwest thing. I've never heard about this.
This is different than the Southwest thing. So I, of course, got on Google and sure enough, on the FAA website, there was an announcement that the what's called the NOTAMs system was down. And so NOTAMs stands for Notice to Air Missions. And basically, it is a system that provides flight like information about safety issues, or I don't know, stuff that I guess some airlines use to ensure that their flight plan is on track or whatever. And it had just gone down. It had gone down the night before, okay? So like anyone who hadn't gotten that their whatever they require before then, basically I think couldn't fly. Now, I think
Wow.
technically that's optional because as I was also monitoring Twitter, there appeared to be other flights that were taking off, like Delta, who may have some other way of like figuring out if there's like, I don't know, flying debris in the air or whatever NOTAMs tells pilots. But American Airlines was reliant on this. And I was like, well, wouldn't this mean that all flights are grounded or something? Because, and I wasn't seeing anything
Mm-hmm.
immediately on Twitter. And then I saw some news reports and then I tweeted out that I was stuck on a plane. And basically the pilot said, you're free to get off the plane, legally speaking. I can't let you reboard, and I would prefer to keep you on the plane because right now the airport is a zoo and you're not going to find any place to sit down. So we sat on the plane for
Oh
four
my God! It's not,
for
and it's not like a plane's a very comfortable place to stay
It's
for
not a
hours.
super comfortable place. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, as this was being reported, the FAA then actually grounded domestic flights and flights coming into the U.S., I guess, until 9 a.m. And their Twitter feed, I started following their Twitter feed, were like providing updates on their system being back up. And so, anyway, to me, this just felt really weird. Like what is happening with our aviation infrastructure that some computer goes down and like nobody can fly? Like
It's really
that's
problematic.
not good. It doesn't
Yeah.
seem
No
like.
kidding. Wow.
And
That's crazy.
so yeah, I was pretty mad at Pete.
Mayor Pete,
I was
you're
really
going
mad
at
at Mayor
Mayor
Pete.
Pete.
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of those things. Like I think I was like Lauren Boebert that was like Mayor Pete's gonna have to answer for this. And I was like, yeah, he is. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like agreeing with Lauren Boebert. Like,
Going to
no,
a
the
dark
world is
place. Oh my God. Poor Mayor Pete. It's funny because I think he took an agency that you think is like all upside, right? Like, well, what could go wrong with the transportation thing? Like you just take credit when, you build a road or something. And wow, he's had to deal with a lot of big problems over there.
Yeah, and what's really funny is my boyfriend knows several Southwest pilots, and so
Oh.
he was texting with them, and he's like, I guess they were getting messages from Southwest, saying, basically saying, we need to make clear to everyone that this has nothing to do with Southwest. So like Southwest, I think was like, look, this one is not us,
Oh, that's
because
so
of
funny.
course they had gotten they were at the root of the debacle over the holiday.
Yeah. Would you fly Southwest again if you had a choice after
I
all of that?
hate
Yeah,
Southwest.
I never been a big fan
So
either.
and
Never been a fan. Yeah.
and there's like a whole cult following for Southwest because I tweeted
Yeah.
once about how I hate their kind of weird cattle call boarding and
Yeah,
no
I don't like
assigned
that either.
seats and like I don't know. And oh my God, like people attack me. They're like, I love Southwest. I only fly Southwest. And
Yeah,
I was like, all
there's a
right,
lot of that.
I mean, I did it this time, but I'm not a big fan. So I very rarely fly them anyway. Um,
Same.
and you and I talked about like before the podcast. I mean, I'm a Delta fan.
Delta. I live in Chicago. Delta's not a big thing here. I'm American. I'm like totally standardized on American. Most people in Chicago are United people. I think they have a bigger hub here, but
What I like about American is that they do serve flavored seltzer.
they
They
do,
have
and then they
they
give you the whole can.
they
And
give you
just
the whole can. They have
that's a big
watermelon,
deal. Okay.
lime, ahas,
Yep.
and Delta does not.
Yeah. Delta.
So I may need to send Delta a nasty gram about
Oh my
serving.
God. Is the Delta most? Is it like an Atlanta like hub? Isn't it more of like
Yeah,
Southeastern
it
airline?
is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's just Pshaw. Yeah, us the Midwesterners, we need a different airline. Wow. Well, I'll tell you this makes me long for being back on vacation, where I was maybe
Mhm.
for a little too long with COVID. Are you catching up on everything?
No. I started class yesterday and I'm still tweaking my syllabus, so
Oh my God. Well, you better get back to work on your class and your
yes.
Substack, and we'll talk to everybody next week.
See ya.
MSW Media.